Delighted to have Anjali Chainani and Dan Hopkins with us this evening from the city's GovLabPHL. So Anjali is Director of Policy for the city and GovLabPHL at the Mayor's Office for the City of Philadelphia. As Director of Policy, she coordinates policy development to ensure the success of important long-term city investments, including the passage of the sugar-sweetened beverage tax. As Director of GovLabPHL, Anjali leads a multi-agency team centered on embedding evidence-based and data-driven practices into city programs and services through cross-sector collaboration. GovLabPHL experiments with how evidence-based methods can intersect to address common municipal challenges to enhance the city's policymaking and service redesign efforts. Anjali holds dual degrees from Temple University in Public Health and Social Work, and is currently completing her PhD in Health Policy at the Mays College of Healthcare Business and Policy at the University of the Sciences, and she previously was a Results for America Fellow from 2016 to 2018. Dan Hopkins is Professor of Political Science, as well as in the Annenberg School for Communication at the University of Pennsylvania. So Dan's a well-known expert in American politics and has written widely on state and local politics, racial and ethnic politics, immigration, and research methods. In 2018, he published Increasingly United States, How and Why American Political Behavior Nationalized with the University of Chicago Press, and has written dozens of well-cited journal articles. Before joining us here at Penn, he served on the U.S. federal government's social and behavioral sciences team, where he assisted in the analysis of an experiment testing different messages to shoppers on the federal healthcare exchanges. He received his PhD from Harvard University in 2007 and writes for 538.com and for the Monkey Cage of the Washington Post. So Dan works closely as an academic advisor for GovLabPHL. And we're delighted to have both of them here with us this evening to talk about the important work that they do, kind of bridging kind of academia and the policy world. So I thought this was a really great opportunity for us to speak with them in Fels, so I think it intersects with a lot of the things that we do here. So thanks so much to both of you for joining us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So I thought maybe we'd start by just talking a little bit about kind of the origins of GovLab and like kind of where it came from and you know why you guys decided to launch it.
Yeah. First, I'll say thank you for your attention tonight. I'm excited to talk about this work. It's exciting to talk about what the city is doing in evidence-based work and the role that universities are playing in public policy, and I'm excited to also hear what some of your ideas might be once we've shared the things that we're doing, because we're always trying to kind of innovate and you know, reevaluate what's working and what's not. So with GovLab, initially the city, the Department of Revenue in the previous administration, so in 2013, applied for a grant called City Accelerator. It was funded by the City Foundation, and the grant was it was a broad kind of goal to impact poverty or reduce poverty through innovation. And our Department of Revenue applied for that grant to say, we want to use behavioral economics and service design or human-centered design and trauma-informed care and combine these three practices to impact senior residents that are applying for a water discount and to motivate tax delinquents to maybe pay their taxes on time. And that was a way of achieving or impacting poverty. So they won the grant, and what they had done was with senior residents, they pre-populated the city's form, so it was less effort for a senior resident to fill out the form to apply for this discount program. And they tested the size and color of envelopes, and they partnered with a researcher from Penn and a researcher from Columbia to design this experiment. And they also tested what kind of labels were going on these envelopes. And so the result of that project was a large envelope, so larger than normal size, and a handwritten address label worked better, and it increased enrollment in that program by 15%, which is a really great outcome. With tax delinquents, they tested a scary letter coming from government, essentially saying that if you don't pay your taxes on time and then you don't take any action for a period of time, you will lose your home, or you're at risk of losing your home. And in the neighborhood that you live, these are locations where people have actually lost their home due to non-payment. And then they also tested, the other version of the letter was just saying social norms that, you know, everyone pays their taxes on time, you should too. The scary letter worked better. The city invested around $30,000 in this mailer campaign and recovered over $600,000 in delinquent tax revenue. That project ended in 2016 once the new administration had come on. So I was not a part of the project, but was certainly a part of learning what the results were and then getting really excited about what the Department of Revenue had done. They partnered with a researcher, they designed this experiment, they were able to implement it, and they had results. And so it kind of, the idea was born that maybe we can replicate this even if we don't have, the grant dollars are over, but you know, the model seemed like a model that we could develop. And so that's really the origin of how the Kenney administration started thinking about research partnerships in this way.
Great, that's really fascinating. The letter experiment, that was with Holger, right?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, so those of you who know Holger Kern, he was one of the people who worked on that experiment. That was actually the first way I ever
Not Kern.
What?
I think his last name was different.
C, right?
C,
Yeah.
sorry.
Oh, C,
C,
yes.
yeah.
Sorry, Holger Kern's someone else. Anyway, yeah, sorry about that. So that's a kind of a nice, example of using, kind of bringing together academic knowledge, but kind of producing a really cool real-world outcome. So I think that's a great kind of overview of the history. Maybe you could talk a little bit about kind of the goals you guys see for it, and the kind of projects you've undertaken, and how you kind of see those two things lining up.
I can take the city side, and then Dan will share the academic side. So we initially started just thinking about what are some pilot projects where we might be able to develop a relationship with an academic and test some policy question. We initially started with our bike share team to see if a email reminder to bike shareholders who had recently, their passes expired, if that would work in motivating them to re-renew their passes. We also worked with our licenses and inspections team. The city invested a lot of money in our new Eclipse system, and we wanted to see how we might be able to motivate license holders to create an account online and then renew their licenses online. But then through doing these couple projects at first and learning a lot of lessons about how to kind of make that work, we realized that there is more of a need, in addition to departments that were excited and ready to do an actual project and dedicate staff time and resources and capacity to implement, there was a whole other body of work to really just allow city employees to learn about research and evidence and what's available, and to have them think about questions that they might have with no mandate that they need to jump in and kind of redirect some of their resources. And so we ended up developing 3 goals with GovLab. The first is to create learning opportunities for city employees, so a safe space to come and say, this area is not working. This is the amount of money that we're spending on this area. Is there a chance to test something, or what would we need to do? We have a PHL government book club that we started, copied off of what Baltimore does. So we choose a book every quarter or a podcast, and we encourage city employees to read what they can, or we'll assign a few chapters, and then we bring them together to talk about the ideas. We have, in 2017 at this point, we had a 10-month speaker series on human-centered design. My colleague, Leanna Dragaman, is a service designer by practice, and so she has contacts all over the country, and use that to call people that she knows to come in and do these talks, both during the day, at lunchtime, and then in the evening. And so there's kind of that scope of work where we're allowing city employees to just think about evidence-based practices in a new way, bring information to them. And then we have the pilot, so that's the Philadelphia Behavioral Science Initiative, which was originally what GovLab was until we turned it into GovLab. So that's the actual pilots. And then we are constantly thinking about how we can continue to engage external partners, so that includes students, researchers, the public. There is some tension around governments experimenting. As you might know, historically, governments have taken advantage of that, and as have researchers, of people's data, and so having a way of talking about that and responding to public concerns and sharing the research and being very transparent about what we're doing and what questions we're answering is our weakest link. We don't have a website, thanks to the researchers. They've started one on our behalf, PhillyBSI.org, but we don't have a city site. So we use Twitter. We're trying to come up with events where residents can come and participate. we had a form redesign event last May, but again, there's so much opportunity to really think about how we can strengthen that aspect of the work.
Yeah. And just to piggyback on that, and I also want to echo, I'm grateful to you all for being here, to Matt, to everybody who's worked to organize this. Piggybacking on what Anjali was just saying, one of the challenges is precisely that being ensconced and enmeshed in research, you wind up thinking that randomized experiments are a very, very powerful tool and an unproblematic tool. And so in some instances, we'll work very hard to implement an experiment, and then when it's covered in the Philadelphia media, if it's covered at all, it's covered with a sort of negative, the city is experimenting on you lens. Not always, but sometimes. And I think that has really led me to be more attentive to the gap between how I think about experiments as a critical tool to help us learn what works and what doesn't, and to help a city in which resources are relatively scarce and where there are, if there's a $1 of tax revenue in the city of Philadelphia, there are immediately 15 great uses that you could put that dollar to. And so it's incumbent on partnerships like ours to do our very best to try to identify how to spend scarce tax dollars wisely. But one of the challenges comes precisely in public communication that then, at the end of the day, for instance, if you are removing or putting trash cans into a given public space, some people may see that as obvious, some people may resent being thought of as an experimental subject. So it presents, I think, real communication challenges. I'd say more generally, getting back to Professor Lewandowski's question, that I initially had a relatively narrow view of what success in this collaboration would mean. For me, initially, success in this collaboration was carrying out successful tests wherein we learn about effective public policy. And I think that is still one of the central goals. That's one of the central yardsticks against which we measure our success, but it's not the only yardstick. So I think certainly our central goal is to identify insights from the social sciences, behavioral sciences, that can help government work better. And then, because there are so many insights, and many of them are context specific, right? A great idea, say, using social norms to try to encourage people to engage in a pro-social behavior. It may work in one context, but it may backfire in another context. As an example, we'll talk later about some of the work that I've done in this vein with the federal government. And there's an extensive literature suggesting that since people are social creatures, if I leverage social norms, if I tell you that it is appropriate that it's socially appropriate that there's a norm that we here do X, Y, or Z, you'll probably do that, right? If everybody, as they walked in, I said the norm in this room is you take off your shoes, you would have given me strange looks. But social norms are powerful. People in uncertain environments look to others to see what's appropriate, what kind of behavior is appropriate. But yet, when we were trying to encourage enrollment in the health insurance exchanges through the Affordable Care Act, and we used a social norm in letters, we said millions of people are signing up, why don't you sign up? It actually backfired. And I think part of the reason it backfired, part of the reason that fewer people enrolled if they got that kind of messaging, is that the Affordable Care Act is a highly politicized, highly contentious kind of policy. But one of, I think, our central goals then is to learn what kinds of tweaks, what kinds of behavioral interventions work in which contexts. That said, as we've been engaged in this collaboration, I've come to realize, and I think I'm here just amplifying something that Anjali already said, that there are a whole bunch of other positive benefits to these kinds of collaborations. So partly, if you think about some process that you own, that you oversee, it's sometimes very useful to have somebody from the outside come in and just ask questions about how it works. So for instance, part of our work with the Zero Waste and Litter Task Force, you can see that we've been totally successful because there is no litter in Philadelphia anymore. But we're making progress. And part of that work was not just implementing tests, though I think we're proud of the tests that we implemented, but also identifying how would you measure, how would you know if we are actually encouraging recycling? How would you know if these spaces are cleaner or not? And asking our great partners at Parks and Rec, the Streets Department, Commerce, how would you, what's your process? What do you measure? a long-standing and I think valuable saying with respect to government is, if you can measure it, you can manage it. And if you can start to identify what are the metrics for these behaviors, that in and of itself is progress. And I don't mean to filibuster for too long, but the final thing I'll say is also that we take very seriously our role to just foster and deepen connections with the city. So for instance, there may be lots of instances where the city doesn't need to run a full experimental trial. The city just wants to identify who within the Philadelphia area is knowledgeable on this or that policy area, right? On universal pre-K or the minimum wage or whatever it may be. And I think one of the things that's really a productive offshoot of these kinds of relationships is precisely that Anjali and her great team in the mayor's office don't need to spend a lot of time tracking down who is the expert at Villanova or St. Joe's on this or that topic, that they can reach out to an existing network and we can pretty quickly point them in the right direction.
Yeah.
Can I add to something that Dan said?
Absolutely.
I think from the city side, I think one thing that's been really exciting about these partnerships is program managers. So, the people that are actually running these programs on the ground have questions about their program. And when we initially started this and presented them with an opportunity to maybe evaluate, there was fear, because the mayor's office kind of controls the budget to some extent, or makes recommendations for what should be funded. And so there needed to be trust built between the mayor's policy office and city agencies in this new way. And then there was distrust around researchers, because they maybe just want the city's data to publish. Like there's assumptions being made. And I think through this process, we've really been able to improve relationships between the mayor's office and city agencies, and then also between researchers and city agencies. The other really great benefit is that a lot of times program managers are just going on a hunch that something's gonna work based on their previous experience. And so our HR department manages our city wellness program, and didn't know what was going to increase enrollment by city employees to participate, which means that they're trying to get city employees to go get a health risk assessment. They're trying to get them to log 60 days of physical activity, which could have great impacts in the long run. And so they were holding seminars, and they were sending emails, and they were sending postcards, and kind of frustrated because you don't really know what is going to work, but you're on the hook for being successful. And so there was this opportunity to test postcards, and that's what we did with them. And even though at the end of the day, we couldn't really tell what worked, the team was so excited because they got insights about specific subpopulations. So we were testing between current employees and retirees, and we were able to see some differences between those. And it just created this light about, we have so many other questions. Like, do you have more resources for us to test something? And another great benefit is, thanks so much to Dan and many other researchers for their time, this is an unfunded initiative so far, and Dan and other colleagues have brought in funds, but they've also spent so much time coming together around the table thinking about, well, what is it that you do, but then what is the question that you actually have, and then what is the data that you have, and through that, the question kind of gets formulated, and then we are not the experts around behavioral science or behavioral economics, and so then they're also spending time telling us how to design the study, and then what is the best way to randomize, and what is the best way to analyze, and the amount of time that is spent is amazing that we have this going on. So I just want to kind of say there's so many benefits on the city side for that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really struck by a couple of things you guys said. I mean, one thing, Claire's not here, but was I was thinking about, especially what Dan was talking about, the Zero Waste and Litter initiative, that just struck me as kind of like a great way of thinking about sort of program evaluation types of things, like what is it that you're trying to achieve, like what are your goals, how do you think about measuring those, very kind of broad way, and so that's really great to see you guys doing that. And the other thing that I had actually never thought of before you guys talked about, I think it's fascinating, is it could almost be a way of building trust with people in the city, right, that and those of you who've lived in Philadelphia for a while, it has definitely gotten better over time, but like the story that I always tell is the condo building that I live in, there was a problem before I lived there, right when it first opened, where some paperwork was out of order, and they called us, they said, hi, the person who at the time was the president said, hi, I'd like to straighten this out, and they said, oof, this is a real problem. You have 30 days or we're revoking your certificate of occupancy and we're, fining you $50,000. He was like, you guys made the error. I'm just trying to get it corrected, right? And so Philadelphia can sometimes seem like not a very, kind of friendly place. So I think, there can be a lot of, if you talk to a lot of, Philadelphians, there can be, especially long-term residents, some kind of distrust of the city, and this can be a way of unpacking the black box of government a little bit and say, like, these are the sorts of things we're trying to do. This is why we're trying to do them. This is why we're looking to make service delivery more effective. So I'm wondering if you guys could maybe point to, and we've already gotten this a little bit, and maybe talk about one or two specific city policies that have changed as a result of this, and then maybe something where you thought it would change but didn't.
So I can start. So I think with I'll use the Zero Waste and Litter Cabinet project first. So one of the other neat things that we did, which changed city process, and I'll get to the policy part in a second, is that so the Zero Waste and Litter Cabinet was created under this mayoral administration, and it involves the departments that Dan had mentioned, so Commerce Department, the Health Department, Streets, Parks and Rec.
Sorry, can I just interrupt? Can we just say what that is for people that might not know?
Say what?
The zero waste, like what's
Yeah, so the goal of this Zero Waste and Litter Cabinet is to reduce waste and have it be a multi-agency effort. So acknowledging that it's not just on the Streets Department that does street cleaning, but we also need to be thinking about what's happening in our parks, what's happening on commercial corridors, and so people that are managing those different areas come together once a month to discuss the strategy, identify the priority areas. We have a litter index, so it's a tool where you can go on cleanphl.org, type in your address, and it identifies what a number 1 through 4 of how bad the litter is in your area, and that helps the city also kind of direct resources once a community group has said, we really want to do something about this block or this area. But what we didn't have before we started talking about this is a committee specifically around behavioral science. The Zero Waste and Litter Cabinet is probably one of our great success stories because of the willingness of city leaders to say, okay, we have a committee on data sharing, we have a committee on, I think, policy, and there's 4 committees. And so we recommended, could we also create one on behavioral science? We have researchers that are willing to attend these meetings, and we can specifically say, with the data that we have, how can we test certain strategies? And so out of that, we've done 2 experiments, and we're doing 2 more. And so Dan, Sion Benoit from Swarthmore College, and Crystal Reek from Temple University have been serving on the subcommittee for over a year. I mean, just think about the time commitment just in that alone. And then we have 4 experiments. So we've done one where we have distributed blue recycling bins with lids to see if that increased or decreased the amount of recycling tonnage that was being collected into neighborhoods. We've done one where we added public waste bins or took them away to see if that impacts the amount of litter and the amount of time spent collecting trash by our sanitation unit. We're looking at doing an experiment around illegal dumping. And then the 4th one is around messaging on illegal dumping to see if the use of door hangers in a positive and, it's not gain and loss. Gain and loss frame works when we're talking about illegal dumping. So I think it's like dump your trash, lose your cash. We're testing rhymes, or nothing beats a clean street. And so, those are the kinds of tests that we're running. So I think there's been one success in just creating that committee and having it be a part of city process has been a great example for even other agencies. How do you integrate this practice and this knowledge base? But then with the success story, so with the recycling bins, we tested this in Port Richmond and in Brewerytown. You'll have to correct me if I get this wrong. So in Port Richmond, we saw that recycling tonnage increased by half a ton per week. In Brewerytown, the data was so variable that it actually had us think about maybe data collection practices aren't streamlined across the city. We don't really know what happened with that. We couldn't tell if there was a difference, but beyond that, I think it was so up and down that it kind of pointed us to saying that maybe there's something going on the back end. So our committee wants to take a look at that and maybe redo the experiment in the future. But that experiment alone helped the city see that evaluation is important, but also They talked to sanitation workers, they went around and looked at what residents were doing with the bins, and they have increased where people can get recycling bins from 6 locations to 20 locations. And so that's something that being able to use the results from an experiment and have that actually impact a policy decision is a really great thing to see, and really great for other departments to see how you do that from beginning to end. I have examples for what hasn't gone right, but I'll wait and kind of let you share something.
Cool. No, so absolutely. I mean, our experiences on the Zero Waste and Litter Task Force, in part, I think, have been very interesting. In that, so when Anjali's talking about data, the data that is generated when a truck comes and picks up recycling or picks up trash, it then has to go dump its load eventually, right? Sometimes it'll do this at the end of the day. Sometimes it'll fill and then have to go dump and then return for the rest of its route. So if you're curious about the variability, if you happen to live on a residential street, it comes partly from whether the truck has to go dump or not. But then one of the challenges is we, as social scientists, I've worked with a lot of survey data, but I've never before worked with recycling tonnage, right? Where they weigh the truck and then they dump the truck. And so that was the key output in this study. And so partly we as researchers then, and I think much more generally, one of the really, really neat opportunities here is that Crystal, Sion, we have a colleague, Ernest, from St. Joe's, the wide variety of researchers who are involved in this work. We often write academic papers and end the academic papers by saying, well, this has some real world implications. If policymakers were to adopt this approach, maybe they could accomplish this or that cherished goal. And it is really neat from a research perspective to not just write a paragraph about how, if this were adopted in the real world, it might work, but to actually both see if it works in the real world and see all of the challenges that come on the implementation side. Right? So the experience has made me both incredibly grateful to Anjali and her team and the mayor for their ability to facilitate these partnerships, but also recognizing that if I write a paper and I make a certain recommendation, it is such a long way from that to actually potentially seeing it influence practice. So,
I think one of the hardship examples that I'll give is lessons that we learned about this process. Our first department that we worked with was licenses and inspections. I mentioned, we tested reminder letters to encourage license holders to register an account online and then renew their license online. And we ended up never really finishing that project. We got some of the data back, but we didn't really know what we were doing because this was the first project. So the commissioner was very interested in wanting to use behavioral economics. We did not know how long the project would take, so there was no way of communicating to the department that we need your commitment for X amount of time. Now we're easily able to say this commitment goes for a year and a half to 2 years, given the amount of time it takes to identify the research question, identify a research partner, get a data sharing agreement, go through all of the implementation, and then there's a whole process around analysis and then sharing the results and writing up the work. We didn't know any of that, didn't expect that yet. So they did the experiment and then we didn't hear from them for months. And they had moved on to something else, and then when the mayor's office was starting to come back to the team and say, hey, we designed this experiment together, I think you guys implemented it, can we talk about how it went? Do you have results to share? And we knew right away, this is not good because they're dealing with other emergencies, their service delivery, they have the concourse and municipal services building. They're not thinking about this experiment anymore. They learned what they learned and they've moved on. And so what we learned from that process is that, we identified a process and we wrote it down and we make sure that every researcher and every city agency is aware of what this takes. They're aware of what our expectations are, that we want to share these results at the end of the day, and it's going to take their team capacity as well as the mayor's office capacity and the researcher to co-design a document that actually says exactly what we've done. We also, now collaborate on a Google document to be writing what we're doing as we go along. I think one thing that we learned from the lab at DC is that they have a pre-analysis plan and they have the randomization written, before they're doing this. We didn't do that at first. So that was another learning opportunity. And so unfortunately, that project has never been written up. even though what we learned from it was that a simple reminder, so that we sent a straightforward deadline letter saying you need to make sure you renew online by X date. We sent one saying that there are personal benefits to renewing online. You save time as an individual, and then there are benefits to the city for renewing online, that we've invested in this program or this database, and so we want you to use it. And the differences between the types of letters was minimal, but just getting a reminder letter increased registration by 19%. So that's the one part of data that we got, but then we wanted to know among different license holders what was the difference, and that all of that stuff never got wrapped up. So that was a good learning experience for us.
Yeah, I mean, I think it points to the challenges of collaborating across these different types of groups. I mean, one thing that I've come to appreciate just trying to partner with different groups in my research, or to the extent that it involves, quote unquote ordinary people who aren't other academics, it's just, we have one very particular way of thinking about these sort of processes, and it takes a lot of, you have to be much more flexible and think a little bit differently when you work with others. So Dan, I wanted to maybe ask you about, you have this experience working for a sadly now defunct organization, but an organization that got to do some really cool stuff during the Obama administration. So maybe could you talk about some of the work you did at the federal government and how, if at all, that informs your work with the city?
Sure, absolutely. And one thing to note is that it is not so much defunct as it's gone into the deep state. So the group that I think that's not a totally incorrect characterization. So just a brief history. When David Cameron became the Prime Minister of the UK, he had set up the Behavioral Insights team, which was a team that was designed to bring insights from the social and behavioral sciences into the United Kingdom's government. The Behavioral Insights team since has spun off and is now a nonprofit, actually, with an office in New York and collaborations in the US as well as the UK. At the same time, roughly the same time, a set of economists, including Sendhil Mullainathan up at Harvard, had founded an organization called Ideas 42, which is another nonprofit whose goal, again, was to try to take insights from the social sciences and bring them into organizational life, improve nonprofits. And so partly this work all sits at the intersection of a couple really important streams where, on the one hand, research and judgment and decision making in the last decade or so has exploded, right? So it's not just that Vox and other media outlets love to cover this. There are lots of academics now who are interested in decision making in a way that they weren't 15 years ago. And many of the leading academics are here in the Philadelphia area who do that kind of judgment and decision making work. So on the one hand, you have growing attention to human decision making within economics, within social psychology, and within political science as well. And then on the other hand, you have an increased interest on the government side in evidence-based government, right? And as an example of this, I mentioned before, so Philadelphia, of the top 10 largest cities, has the highest poverty rate, so has a particular challenge we really have to stretch tax dollars. We have to spend money much more efficiently than a Boston or a New York to try to get anywhere near the same kinds of outcome. So then Barack Obama had overseen the creation in his second term of the social and behavioral sciences team. And the goal of this team, and it was a really neat opportunity, was precisely to bring social scientists into government to work directly with government agencies and try to identify and carry out experiments where we try to identify ideas from social science that may be impactful and then test them in the real world. And I think that it was a very, very eye-opening experience for me in many regards. I think partly it was an eye-opening experience just for what it told me about contemporary American policymaking. I think that 40 or 50 years ago, maybe even 30 years ago, if a Georgetown government professor had been interested in getting involved in public policymaking, I might well have been steered toward Congress, right? I might well have been engaged in the design of, at a low level, the design of program. And nowadays, with Congress so deadlocked, instead, a lot of the innovation is sort of, incremental innovation that can happen within existing statute by the executive agencies that oversee these programs. So to some degree, the very fact that so much of our energy was devoted within the context of the existing statute, I think, suggests some of the limitations of contemporary federal policymaking. So at one point I was working with the Department of Education. There's a program through the US federal government that helps hundreds of thousands of migrant families coordinate their schooling across states, right? There are hundreds of thousands of kids whose parents are often, they're not always farm workers, and so who may spend part of their year in Georgia, part of their year in Michigan. And there's a federal, there's part of the Department of Education that is designed to help those kids. But when you talk to them about potentially changing congressional statutes, immediately they said, no, we don't want to, even if it is obvious that some of the statutes are outdated and that they would do well, they could be more effective if they were to modify certain statutes, they don't want Congress to know they exist, right? Because in this contemporary environment, to draw attention is simply to put yourself at risk, politically. And so I think partly I had a tremendously neat experience with the federal government, but I was also very aware of the fact that our very existence kind of suggested some of the limits of contemporary federal policymaking. So just then to talk briefly about the actual experience, we were very focused on identifying agency partners and then trying to conduct experiments. And on the whole, I think we had a number of really notable successes. I mentioned earlier some of our work trying to increase enrollment in the Affordable Care Act. We had both a program of sending letters and an email program designed to encourage enrollment in the Affordable Care Act through the exchanges. Another, I think, valuable success for us early on was that there is something called the industrial funding fee. The industrial funding fee is a fee that federal contractors, federal vendors, people who sell things like desks and trucks to the federal government remit. And so at the end of every quarter, if you are Walmart and Walmart sells a lot to the federal government, you have to report to the federal government how many pens have you sold, how many desks have you sold, etc. And the challenge was that this is all self-reported. Right? It's not checked against the records. The federal government doesn't then call up all of its many, many agencies and say, did you really buy 2 desk chairs on this date? So it's all self-reported. And one of the key innovations that the team suggested, which is very, very minor, is just to have the people who are doing this reporting certify that the reporting is accurate before they do the reporting. Right? Because we know from Dan Ariely's work and other research that it's not that people are consciously, for the most part, wanting to defraud the government or to mislead people. It's just that if we have an incentive, if we have an opportunity to kind of shade things a little bit in our direction, we'll do this. Right? And I don't know how many of you are parents, but I see this all the time with my children. Right? So the same thing was happening with the industrial funding fee. And simply by asking people to certify the accuracy of their results, we increased the amount of fee that was remitted in the next quarter by more than $1 million. Right? So that's $1 million that you don't have to raise through taxes or in other ways and that you can use for federal programs. And I think having that project as one of our early projects was also really valuable because we're going to a wide set of federal agencies trying to pitch them on this kind of collaboration. And if you can say, hey, we saved the General Services Administration, or we identified $1 million for the General Services Administration, that gets people's attention. I think the federal government work also made me attentive to, if not one of the limits, I think one of the challenges of this work, in that I, like many people, have gotten interested in public policy to a substantial extent because public policy has a unique capacity to protect and promote disadvantaged people in American society. And so when I started to work with the federal government, I very deliberately identified agencies that were working with people with concentrated disadvantages. So I had a lot of conversations with the Department of Interior, the Bureau of Indian Education, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, right? Some of our most concentrated disadvantage in this country is on Indian reservations and more generally among Native populations. But one of the challenges is that this approach, in some instances, relies on a level of administrative capacity that not all agencies have. So when I would call up Bureau of Indian Education schools and say, hey, we've identified a really valuable minor tweak where if you can just send text messages, or if you can just tell us who's not in school, we can text their families, and those text messages will increase their attendance. And principals of these schools would say, well, that's all well and good, but I don't have a working internet connection, right? And I think more generally, one of the challenges is that some of the federal agencies that are the best equipped, that are in some ways the most consumer-oriented, that have cultures of sharing data, are also those that serve either more diverse constituencies or more upper middle class constituencies. And one of the things that I was very mindful of with the federal government is that we did extensive work with the VA, but some of our most straightforward projects were not in the areas where there's concentrated disadvantage and where those administrators and staffers just have so many challenges that the idea of implementing an experiment is not feasible. And one other example here in Philadelphia, one of our real successes and our early successes was partnering with Indigo, the bike share, which probably many people have used. I think it was a very, very valuable tool, and one of the things that we're trying to do with Indigo is precisely to help them think through how to make sure they're serving the broad range of Philadelphia. But Indigo is obviously serving a broad range of people, including more upper middle class Philadelphians. And so I think one of the challenges that's incumbent on those of us who do this work is to make sure that we don't naturally gravitate towards those policy areas where this work is easier to do, which may also be those that serve more upper middle class constituents.
Great.
Sorry, can I add one?
Yeah, absolutely.
When Dan was talking about challenges, it made me think about just another example to give to you guys is, folks in this program, you might appreciate this challenge or this tension, this inherent tension between respecting the process for a randomized control trial, but then in practice, when you're actually doing it, you get confronted with questions and decisions that you need to make that then might compromise the study and the results that you want to be able to share. So during our bin distribution, the treatment period was a single Saturday where we partnered with two rec centers for residents to come to the rec center, sign their name, and I think we asked them for ID. Maybe not, I forget. Maybe we just asked them for their address, but in any sense, they came on that Saturday to pick up the bin. And one of the things we did not think about, it did not come up in any conversation as we were planning this for months and months, what do we do if we have leftover bins at the end of the day? And so that is exactly what happened at the rec centers. We ended up not giving them all away. We had 2,400 to distribute. And so for the city, we wanted to keep giving them after the Saturday because people come to the rec center on Sunday and they'll be there on Monday and they'll see them and they're gonna want them. But for the study purposes, because the treatment period was that day, we knew that we needed to ask, right? So we called Dan and he was there at first period of the day, but at the end of the day, what do we do with these bins? Because we don't want to compromise the study, but ethically, if we have bins, we need to give them out. So what we ended up kind of compromising on was that we are going to give them out, but we need to make sure that the rec center leaders definitely document who's picking them up so we can account for it when we are wrapping up the results and saying that after the treatment period, this number of bins were still delivered. Anything else to add to that? I think that was a funny kind of moment where we're like, we didn't think about this.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the projects we're now engaged in, we're helping the part of the Department of Health, right, with the youth tobacco inspection. So what we want to do is evaluate the efficacy of and try to maybe improve the efficacy of youth tobacco inspections. When people sell cigarettes to minors, they then are going to receive a citation. How can we make sure that they're not reoffending? And so we have a pretty complicated experimental design, and I'm on the phone pretty regularly with them, but I think it's both a very helpful process. I hope it's helpful for them, but certainly for me to get a sense of what are some of the challenges here. And two, there are, right now, at sites throughout Philadelphia, there are these signs that Anjali had mentioned that are either positively or negatively framed around littering. And I think I can tell you guys this because I hope you're not about to take 18 old tires and dump them to mess up our experiment. Please don't. You also
a whole variety of reasons.
Yeah.
The
city could seize your truck. But partly then, just how do we actually check compliance has been on the researcher side. You know, you can hide behind your spreadsheet, but it's really, really valuable to actually know, you know, what is the process that produces these zeros and ones.
Yeah. So I think we're running a little bit over, so I just want to close this. That's okay. It's been great. This kind of first part of the discussion before we open it up with, what are maybe some of the ways that people who are interested in this work could be involved in? Are there opportunities through like the open data, or just, you know, opportunities to kind of, you know, participate either as like a researcher or as just someone who's a Philadelphian who's interested in this?
Yeah, and so this is where I will identify the ideas that we have, and certainly open to hearing ideas that you all may have either tonight or at another time. We have so the first and most minimal level of engagement, and it certainly doesn't reach everyone, is our Twitter account. So GovLabPHL, we have you know, we engage every day with updates and things that we're doing. We have an email, govlabphl@phila.gov, where we encourage, especially students, but also researchers and other folks, to send their questions, their ideas. You know, we get research proposals through that account, which then we can shop around to agencies and see if they're interested. We try to have events, so we have an annual conference. We had our third one last year, and that really brings together researchers and students, certainly, to help organize and plan and to be there with city officials to have this opportunity or a day to share what we've done, but then where can we go from here? And so that really breeds like new ideas every year. And then I mentioned this event that we did, so we combined the use of behavioral economics and service design and asked residents to come in and look at 6 city forms and give their feedback on the form. Is it challenging to fill out? Is it easy? You know, what makes sense to you? And then in the second portion of the day, we had our academic and content experts turn that feedback into actionable recommendations. And so over the past 8 months, we've been redesigning those forms, and we're really excited for the mayor to unveil what the form looked like to what the form is now. It's such a drastic difference. We've done them in phases because of just low capacity, so it's taken time. But one form that was 5 pages is now just front and back 2 pages, and it's exciting to say that those recommendations came from residents. So I think those are the ways right now. We have students do fellowships with us, so we have generally Penn students in the fall and the spring, and we'll get recommendations through Dan and Chris from the master's program. And then in the summer, we have a commitment with Swarthmore College, and they fund 2 full-time students to be with us for 10 weeks. So that's what we have right now. And then certainly just email communication. We have researchers contacting us. Yeah.
Great. Why don't we open it up to the floor for questions? So what questions do people have for Dan and Anjali?
Hey, I'm Marielle. I'm a first-year student in the exec program at Fels. My question is about how you think about scaling or replicating the insights that you generate through the experiments. So, you know, for example, if you find that a certain type of messaging or channel of messaging is most effective in the streets department, how do you think about whether that insight translates to other departments, and when do you think about it's the time to sort of reevaluate that? Like, okay, 5 years ago we found that this intervention really worked well. How long are we going to use that to inform what we're doing? I imagine it probably varies a lot depending on the project and the department and everything, but just curious if you have any sort of lessons learned there or a stream of work that's sort of looking at that.
Yeah, so I think, and this is an area where we can certainly improve. I think having the mayor's office involved, because we interact with so many agencies, it has decreased the amount of work that's done in a silo, where just an agency and a researcher will work together. They will do a project, they'll come up with the results, and the results stay within that department. So now, because there's this broader partnership, when we have, even if it's a null result, we encourage departments to share that. We will send like email updates to department leadership. We have a monthly meeting with the mayor called the A-team meeting, administration meeting. So we will have departments present on what they did, their research design, and what the results were. Also through the conference, we're able to share widely. But I think that there is certainly still an opportunity to figure out as we're going along, and certainly city employees aren't able to come to all of those leadership meetings, so how do you really get the information to the program managers is something that we're still kind of trying to figure out. One thing that we want to do, which the lab at DC does, and if you're not on their listserv yet, I highly recommend that you go on their website and get those updates, but they send monthly emails just kind of sharing what they're doing. And because now we have so much interest from students and researchers, we are starting a listserv as well. So we will be able to share information out to city employees or to the whole listserv, just saying, you know, what did we do and what did we learn?
I think I would just add to that there are, if you think about the set of things that we could possibly test, the set of things that we are now testing is just so small, right? That there are so many, and this is, this kind of evidence towards orientation and testing is partly a mindset. But I think then one of the challenges is that of all the possible tests, Anjali and her colleagues and my colleagues and I need to really be thoughtful about which are the tests where we don't already know, like, this is the highest value test. Because in some other cases, we may know that, hey, this is a better policy. And for us, one of the real frontiers is how much do contexts matter? So how do things translate across different cities? Anjali's mentioned a few times the really pioneering lab at DC, which is certainly got foundation funding, but is within the city government and is a very robust collaborative endeavor. There's obviously our work here in Philadelphia. The Ideas 42 has a team that's embedded in the city of Chicago, and there are a number of cities that are trying to think in this way. And I think one of the challenges for us moving forward and scaling up is to test the same work in different places and see, does it hold up in these contexts, right? So there was a New York Times article about a completed study of the introduction of officer-worn body cameras among police officers in Washington, D.C. It found no effect of body-worn cameras on complaints or other outcome measures. Does that hold across cities? Really interesting question. Do the same kinds of approaches that we find work in Philadelphia, do they work in other cities? Do they work in other contexts? And I think that gets us to one of, in part the Holy Grail is starting to figure out what works in what conditions exactly as your question implies.
Yeah, Yasmin.
Hi, I'm Yasmin, a second year student at Fels. So the federal government just passed the Open Government Data Act, which makes all federal agencies have to supply their data in a public, a standardized, and most importantly, a machine-readable way. Which is really ridiculous that they passed it. Like, they aren't passing anything. So it's really, really weird that this got passed.
Look, you have to take what you can get sometimes.
I know.
As Dan pointed out.
So I'm sure you won't be surprised that one of the biggest advocates for this was a consortium of academics and researchers. So can you speak to how this new policy would impact the work that you do if it doesn't all specifically on the local level and not just on a federal level?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up open data. I meant to mention that. So we have an open data team at the local level within the Office of Open Data and Digital Transformation that works with residents and community groups and then intergovernmental work to publish data sets. I think the biggest, so I think that those data sets are used by researchers, they're used by the city, but there's so many opportunities for someone to look at some of those data sets and then identify a research question and say, hey, is the city looking at this? We don't have my team, we don't have the capacity, we're rarely on that website to use that to formulate a research question. And to some extent, it's a missed opportunity because the data is all there. But there's so much other work to be done around some of the other questions that we want to answer, and usually that data that we want is not on open data. It requires a data sharing agreement and all of that stuff. So I think there's a lot of opportunity, and it would really be great to be getting recommendations from people who have the time to look at the city site, even like saying, okay, you have X data on this, and then this other department has this. Can we merge this and identify a way to use both of those sets to answer this question? I think we'd be really excited to consider those ideas if someone has the time to send them to us.
And just one other quick thing that I would add to that, and I'm going to use the F word, being federalism. When I worked with the federal government, one of the things that was really striking is that the US federal government spends billions of dollars, but in a variety of policy areas, but does so in important ways through the states and localities. So when I was working with the social and behavioral sciences team at the federal level, we often looked enviously at state and local governments because state and local governments are actually administering these programs. And I was very surprised by the extent to which the federal government does not track the outcomes that it is ostensibly paying for. And so I think that one of the challenges that we face is that oftentimes these kinds of collaborative efforts require coordination across the levels of government. So at the end of my time at the social and behavioral sciences team, one of the projects that I started to get involved with was a project wherein, so if you receive food stamps are administered through the USDA, right? If you receive Medicaid is administered as part of a state federal partnership, but the federal overseer is through HHS, right? Not through USDA. And so even though people have to verify their income for both of these programs, they do so with separate bureaucracies. And one of the things that I think if you take a systemic, and particularly if you take a citizen level or a customer level approach to this, the fragmentation of our policy both across agencies and across the levels of government is a real challenge. And so any opportunities that we have to unify the outcome data with the inputs and the programmatic inputs, I think is great.
Good questions. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Madeline. I'm a second-year student. And the thing that I'm curious about is a lot of times in behavioral economics and these things, you do have to, by the nature of the work, kind of narrow people down to a data point. And I'm wondering, what ways do you integrate qualitative methods into your work and try to make sure that you're taking kind of that whole person approach and getting the picture that might not come out of the data?
Yeah. So I think there have been recent articles that I've read where more city agencies are now using or testing with behavioral economics and service design because in order to leverage both quantitative and qualitative data, because even with the Department of Revenue's initial project, they first convened senior citizens and said, what is the barriers that you're experiencing with applying for this discount program that you are eligible for? Do you not know about it? Is the form confusing? Does it require too much documentation? You know, what are the barriers? And so that in one way can help really inform what the experiment should be or what the intervention should be. And then on the back end, even getting people's perceptions and ideas with our sustainability office. The city wants to do something around heat and heat equity because through research that was done by someone from Arizona, we are realizing that some neighborhoods in Philadelphia on the same day are 20 degrees hotter than other neighborhoods because of the lack, it's a big disparity because of the lack of trees and the pavements and lack of white roofs and resources. And in order to actually, the city could come into a neighborhood and say, this is what we think you need. But really what would be more effective is to hear from the residents themselves and understand, do you know how hot it gets in your home? What are the strategies that you use to cool your home? Do you have air conditioning or do you leave your home when it gets hot? Do you prefer to stay in your home? And so we actually worked with Penn's master's program, so Chris and his team, to develop a survey. The city, in partnership with students, administered that survey this past summer. So we identified the Hunting Park neighborhood as the most vulnerable neighborhood. So we focused in one area. And then hopefully by this coming summer, we'll be able to take the insights that we got from that survey and actually develop a test to see what we want to do. I think the researchers are recommending that we test a social tree or like social connectivity so that we can see if there are, who in the neighborhood are the people that can make that initial call, ask if a senior resident or a family is okay, and then they would call someone else and they would call someone else, and it kind of tests that, who are the trusted community partners in the neighborhood and how can information be shared in a low-cost way. So I think that those are the ways that both of those strategies can be used.
I think I would just very quickly add that for me, one of the neat experiences of this partnership was the Formapalooza event that Anjali had mentioned. And some people may hear the idea of spending a Saturday in the spring, it was a nice day, redesigning city forms, and they think that is not an ideal way to spend a Saturday.
What kind of person is that?
Now that's you.
One of the things that was really meaningful about it is precisely that we had residents from the city, and I'm a resident of the city, but I approach this with a different perspective. We had residents who were dealing with these forms who could help ground our approaches. And I think that I've found in other areas of research that say, you generate a lot of insights through conversations and getting some sense of user experience, right? Because user experience can often look very different than the administrator's experience. That said, to be honest, and I think here I'm talking exclusively about my federal government work, when you think about a project initially, the qualitative component always loomed large, and then that always seemed to be the first thing that went. So I was going to collaborate with an American Indian tribe to try to improve some of the interventions they were using in their schools. And the initial plan was that I was going to travel to that American Indian tribe, spend some time immersing myself, and then as other responsibilities encroached, that wound up being a conference call. And so I think that it is an area where it is too easy for data-focused researchers like me to hide behind their spreadsheets, and I think that it's a really important injunctive to get out and watch the data collection process.
I think there's a question in the back, yeah.
Yeah, thanks. This is all really exciting, interesting. I'm around second-year executive students. This is more for Anjali. I've been involved in Philadelphia civics and politics for a couple years now. I was a committee person, sort of on a pack called Fully Set Go. And I came to really admire Jim Kenny's administration. Thanks for the work that you do. I think it's kind of really forward-thinking, progressive. But conversely, I find the city council members themselves to be the opposite. Sort of really stuck on very basic block and tackle of city governance, like serving constituents and sort of bumbling through the zoning process and often getting in the way. I'm really someone who's anti-development, so I'm not like a pro-developer type of guy. But so in the city with 17 city council members, why do we have them? What do they do? Are they good? I mean, you worked with Blackwell for 10 years. My sense is that without them, we wouldn't miss a beat. I don't know if I'm being cynical because I don't really know why it matters sometimes who they are and what they do that really drives legislation forward. Because the mayor's office is awesome. You guys do a great job.
Thank you.
But what do they do in your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair question. Before I started working for city council, I didn't know what legislators did, but I also didn't know what the mayor's office did or what city agencies did either. But they are an important branch in the process, so they are our legislators. The administration can allocate resources, but we certainly cannot make the law, and so that separation of power is there for a reason. It certainly can be argued for hours whether or not that's necessary or what would be different if we didn't have those separation of powers. But our 17 legislators, they introduce legislation, they consider major issues. The public comes in to testify on those issues. Now again, it's debatable whether residents feel heard by their city council people, but they are our representatives. I think being in an election year, there are over, I think, 50 candidates for the at-large positions in city council, which are, just 7. And it is very difficult unless you have a lot of time to keep up with who the candidates are and what do they represent, and how do you really get to know them before they're elected and all of that stuff. But I do think that they're important. And yeah, I mean, you have to be engaged. It's difficult. It takes time. City council hearings are held during the day. There's a big debate around even when people are able to vote. Like, it's on a Tuesday from 8 to 8. There's barriers in place around that. But I would not be one to say that we don't need council members. I think especially some of them are great advocates of using data and evidence. Certainly not all of them, but it's also our job to educate our legislators on what is important to us. We can't assume that they're gonna know, right? Issues change, our priorities are changing. I think as younger people are running for office, and maybe the millennial kind of generation or the ones after that can relate to those younger council people, it's still gonna be important for you to show up and say, this issue is important to me and this is why, and this is the population that it serves. I do not have an interest in running for office, but I can say that the people who have the courage to do it end up putting their entire lives and the lives of their families on the line of being out there and exposed, and it's difficult to take a position on something that is very controversial and stand for that. Like, that is a hard thing to do. So I think it's also worth, if you do feel cynical about council members, to go and talk to their staff and talk to them. I think that they, even though it's easy to be cynical, they are special people that are doing a very special job. I don't think all of us are cut out to do that, because it's just difficult. And I think even in your classes, you could even get a sense of your own courage that when you want to take a position on something and people are going to be against it, are you still willing to do that? And I think council people don't have a choice. Once they're in that position, they're on the line to do that.
Just one thing that I'll add very quickly, aside from the fact that I think Anjali would be an incredible leader in any capacity that she chose, so if you run for mayor, after Mayor Kenny has served out his time, just let me know. But much more seriously, I hope that over time, at the federal, at the Commonwealth or state level, at the city level, that the kinds of conversations that are primarily being had within forward-thinking executive offices like Mayor Kenny's, like the federal level, I hope that those conversations increasingly involve legislators, for the important reason that I would love not only to be testing different programs after the fact, I would love to do a better job building evaluation into these programs in the first place. Right? We could be learning a ton if our legislators were more aware of the deep, deep benefits of building systematic testing into their proposals.
Thank you. There's another question in the back.
Thanks so much for what you guys do. I'm wondering about how you're thinking about continuity. So as administrations turn over, they might have different personnel, you might have different commitments, different priorities. How do you bank those results and make sure that these initiatives have sustainability looking forward?
Yeah,
So,
go ahead.
I just had a very quick anecdote on that point. My academic research focuses a fair amount on immigration. So when I was with the federal government, I really wanted to partner with the USCIS, the Customs and the USCIS, United States Immigration.
Customs and Immigration.
Yeah, no, it's not Customs. United States Citizenship. Rogers, help me out. Anyway. Yeah, they're the people who handle the naturalization rules.
Those people.
And so I really wanted to partner with them. But when I finally got, after 6 months of trying to identify how to meet with them, when I finally got the meeting, sat down and they said, it's 2015. There's an election coming up. Why would we ever invest scarce resources as a political lightning rod of an agency in partnering with you guys when we don't, the next administration could have a very, very different view about whether we want to be speeding along the naturalization process. And so I think it's a very, very fair question, but at the same time, Anjali, when she started, mentioned that this idea had been incubated under Mayor Nutter, but then I think really, in some sense, accelerated or ramped up under Mayor Kenny. And I think that in particular, mayors of a city like Philadelphia, this is, in some sense, such an obvious win-win, right? That our tax dollars are scarce, and so we have to be figuring out how we can maximize the impact of those scarce tax dollars. I think that to executives faced with all of the responsibilities that a big city mayor faces, the case is pretty obvious.
And just to add to that, and I'll try to be quick, we have developed now a culture within city government where agencies themselves hopefully will say to their leaders, we want resources to be able to evaluate what we're doing so we can know. But beyond that, I think the mayor's office is most at risk. We will, it's likely that when there is a new mayor, we will all be replaced. But that isn't to say that we have our documents, we have our research results, we have the research designs and plans that we will hand over to somebody. It may be someone who is in our chief administrative officer and does the back end stuff. It might be in our innovation office. But certainly that information is not going to be lost. We will also make sure council members know, and so I think that I'm hopeful that the next mayor, when he or she is elected, will see the value of the work that we've done and will be able to see the value, especially within the goals that they have for their administration.
Mr. Hopkins.
Okay, so I just want to say thank you again for coming, and we're really impressed sort of with everything that you guys are doing. So the question that I have for the program is that Matt and I have these secret conversations every once in a while, and one of the secret conversations we have had is, you know, we really love what you're doing, and what should the University of Pennsylvania, more in particular the Fels Institute of Government, do to sort of support this? You know, how would we, you know, what could we do? You know, Matt and I have sort of limited influence, but nonetheless some influence, and like we actually think that this is really important, and many of us, all of us, I think, almost work here, and many of us live here, and so, and I think that that's one of the reasons, like, what's, you know, interesting, you know, Professor Hopkins, of like what, you know, I mean, you get to live in the place where you're doing research, and it improves your quality of life along with all of these, the quality of life of others. But what should we do? What should Penn, if we're going to go and make a pitch, what could we do to help this exercise, and how could we be involved?
I can start with that. So I think on one level, our mayor's office is in routine communication with the government affairs office here at Penn, and so making sure that on both ends, both entities know what the benefits are for this kind of work. So there needs to be a very clear benefit to the University of Pennsylvania for being involved in an initiative that involves resources, and you're helping the city answer these key questions. And I think we've kind of illuminated some of those benefits tonight. I think beyond that, Penn has been, and Fels has been such an amazing partner through a grant that Dan has gotten for 3 years in a row. Penn has sponsored our annual conference so that people can come together for a day and talk about this. And we certainly can't expect Penn to do that every single year. There's, you know, other asks and things that need to be funded, but without that, we wouldn't have been able to bring together city leaders and academics for 3 years in a row to talk about the value of this work. And so I think that's one concrete way. We've also gotten amazing students, undergrads, you know, master's level students, PhD students that are committing their time. I think that has been extremely valuable. And then, you know, being able to talk to other researchers. So as Dan had mentioned, there are ample opportunities and research questions and policy areas that we need help with. You know, right now, for example, we're coming up with an inclusive growth strategy. And essentially what that entails is this idea that, you know, the city can continue to grow in population and in business and in opportunity, and it can do so without being inclusive, right? That's happened 1,000 times in the past, but this administration wants to focus on how can the city grow, but also be thinking about equity and inclusivity. And that strategy is really looking at what are we doing in the housing area with our housing plan? What are we doing with opioids and public health? What are we doing with violence? What are we doing with tax incentives? What are we, you know, all of these policy areas. And there needs to be researchers at the table who are experts in particular areas saying to us, you know, this is the tax structure that has worked in other places, or these are the this is the impact that you would see. We don't have the time or the capacity to do deep level research as much as we want to, right? We end up just needing to provide the service, we need to make the decision, and so I think that is the key area, is providing, you know, that expertise.
And just to jump in, I mean, I think first, Anjali's entirely right that Penn has been very supportive. So we, and in addition to the conferences, which Fels has supported, we also have a grant from the School of Arts and Sciences, which is going to help support our work increasing voter turnout in the upcoming primary and general elections here in the city, which we're really excited about, and which has been a kind of transformational kind of project as we transition to try to do, you know, having built a level of support both within the city and the academy for this kind of work, we're excited by that support lets us do a project that's kind of at the next level. I think one of the challenges, and I'd be very open to folks' thoughts about how to navigate this, is aligning the incentives on the academic side with aligning the incentives on the government side. So at the level of students, we are very excited that, as Anjali mentioned, students sometimes do fellowships, and they'll go down to City Hall maybe a day a week, and that has, in some instances, been, you know, career changing for some of the students who've gotten to do that. But it's not, to it's not as easily scaled. And one of the challenges, I would love to see more classes and master's level projects involving the city, but one of the challenges, when I started doing this work with the social and behavioral sciences team in DC, I was told this is like going on a lot of first dates, in that you talk to a lot of agencies, and some of them you're really into it and they're not, and some of them they're really into it and you're not, and some projects survive. But when I'm starting projects, I always mention the fact that that a lot of these projects are not going to ultimately pan out. The challenge that means is that if we get a group of students who could be really excited about a project and maybe thinking about this project as a master's level project or a thesis, it may not happen. And so I think one of the things that I need help thinking through is how do we best integrate the great talent that we have here in a kind of inconsistent environment where for these projects to really work well, you both need the high level support that Anjali and her team and the leaders of the agencies can provide, but you also need the person who knows how this 1980s era computer system works. You need the mid-level folks who administer these programs to really be bought in. And so I think aligning students' incentives, and then the final thing I'll say is also academics incentives. I'm really lucky in that Penn also makes this work possible by having tenured me, and so, but I have not yet published any of the work I've described here, right? And an assistant professor couldn't do that.
We won't ask any of them to do that.
Yes, and so I think partly at the university level, one of the things to think about is in my mental bucket, I think of this as a form of service. More than I think of this as sort of my research bucket, right? Even though it's obviously doing research. And so ways that we can help our colleagues get involved and overcome those incentives. And then the final thing I'll say is this work has also convinced me that there's a real need for the distillation of academic evidence. That like Raj Chetty and hundreds of academics are doing incredible work that needs to be distilled in a way that Anjali and her team and comparable teams in other cities can very quickly see what works. We need to fight poverty. We have a very limited budget. What do we do to fight it?
Other questions? In the back.
What have you tried or considered trying to improve your press coverage that you mentioned early on?
So we write blogs and publish those. We pitch news stories to the press. I think we have been lucky. I mean, if you Google GovLab, we do have positive news stories, so it certainly hasn't been all bad. And we have quite a bit of material. I think that when we did our litter experiment and the results that we got crushed by the public because people thought, well, that answer was obvious. Like, of course, if you have more trash bins, the amount of time people are going to spend picking up litter is going to go down. But we try to defend that by just saying, like, yeah, we could have guessed that, but we don't really know until we do it, and it can inform policy decisions moving forward about how to allocate resources appropriately. And to really make that case, right? Because we have city employees that will say, we need more trash bins, but with all the other asks that are being made, when you have research behind that, you can really kind of move the needle on that. So, yeah, I think there's always room for better press. With our Twitter account, we try to elevate who our champions are. So specific people, specific researchers are being kind of promoted that way as well. So I think there's students, have written blogs for us about what their experience has been working with us and for us, but sometimes the news media isn't interested in writing those stories, so we have to write them ourselves.
I would just say that there's a set of people who are really excited to hear about these kinds of collaborations and the joint capacity of kind of government know-how and some research ideas. But there also, it is a challenge to talk specifically about experiments. And I think one of the things that we are doing at the city level, which is not true when I was working at the federal level, is we are not purely focused on experiments. I mean, experiments are a gold standard technique to learn about policy interventions. But there are times, so for instance, when we needed to evaluate the recycling bin distribution, we used a different observational research design because that's what we could do. And I think one of the things I found through doing a fair amount of this work is that sometimes simply analyzing data. Like one of the capacities that we have in abundance is we've got lots of data analysts, lots of people who could help with this data. And on the city side, there's lots of knowledge that we have embedded in these data sets that we just, if we had time to look at, we would learn from. But that said, so to take this, it kind of, sits kind of, it's like a bee in my bonnet kind of thing. We don't know, yes, we know that more trash cans is good to a point, right? Nobody would want to walk into this room and have trash cans, have like 15 trash cans in this room, right? And so we needed to do a test to try to see what's the margin, how many, is it more efficient to have fewer trash cans and maybe just a little more time picking up the litter or not? And I think these questions that seem obvious when you ask people, okay, what is the trade-off? How many trash cans do I want to have in a Philadelphia city park per acre? They don't know, right? But it's that said, when we do experiments, people do not like to be experimented on. And that's as true for us as for anybody else. And so I think that learning how to talk about the benefits of this, and also when I started to work, particularly on American Indian policy, the first phone call that I did, and I used the word experiment, then one of my colleagues pulled me aside and said, let's just talk about it as a test. Because in the particular context of American Indians, the idea of the federal government, people in Washington, D.C., who are not of Native background, coming in and doing experiments was an anathema. And so I think partly as researchers, too, we need to learn how to talk about and motivate our results. So just another quick example of this. At one point I was on a call with another researcher talking about one of our experiments, and the researcher started talking about cell size. And if you work for the city, if you think about cell size, you think we're talking about jails and what is the size that people have in a jail, when in fact we're talking about how many people fit into an experimental cell. And so I think that partly we as researchers, and we get better at this with practice, the more we talk about what we're doing, we realize, hey, experiments, not so much, but people are fine if you say, hey, we're going to have an A/B test.
I think we have time for maybe one more question, if there's anything else.
And if there's not, I have an interesting thing to share. If there's no question. I'm really intrigued by the earlier question about the value of council people. I just think that it's interesting to think about, right? But yesterday, City Council passed a ban on cashless stores. And so if any student is looking for an interesting kind of research question to focus on, there are a couple coffee shops and stores in downtown that have stopped accepting cash. You have to pay with your credit card. And one of those stores, which is really the impetus of this legislation coming up, was Bluestone Cafe, which is right across the street from City Hall. And a council person had went over there and likes to pay in cash, and they couldn't pay in cash. And that experience resulted in this idea of this question about, if stores stop accepting cash, what does that mean for folks that do not have a bank account or only pay in cash? And so it launched this big debate over the past few months. Now the bill has been sent to the mayor to sign, and there's all this debate within city government and external as to, is this a policy that is setting us back? Is it a policy that is moving forward with the times, because technology is, obviously growing and that's not going anywhere? And so should businesses be regulated in this way, and is government the right body of people to be telling businesses how they can accept payment? So it's, there's questions around, have other cities done this? What's been the impact on those stores? That is research that the city would love to have, but none of us have time to do it, and so it is what it is. If the bill goes into effect, there might be research on what happens, but it's just an interesting question that I'll leave you guys with.
All right, well, please join me in thanking Jen.